Hello again, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, which is a follow-up to the workshop Getting Started in Community Economic Development, which was part of the Community Economic Development track at the annual conference a couple of weeks ago in Denver. Again, my name is Kevin Kelly. I'm the Director for Community Economic Development here at Partnership, and I saw you all at the workshop in Denver. My role is to encourage more community action agencies to take on economic development and housing projects. Today's presentation will provide information on how one of our members, Mid-Michigan Community Action, decided to get involved in an economic development effort in the small town of Clare, Michigan, which involved the restoration of an historic train depot in order to boost tourism in the area. Our speaker today will be Jill Sutton, who's Executive Director of Mid-Michigan Community Action, and I'll now turn it over to Jill. Jill, are you there?
Sure am. Thank you. Hi, buddy. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, hear you.
Yep.
Wonderful, wonderful. Hey, sorry it took so much. We had a little bit of electronic problems here, and I was trying to get some help, but I'm really glad that we're online now, and I'm going to follow my PowerPoint from my distance because I can't see the webinar, but at least I can talk to people. So I'm really excited to be a part of this because when we got into the Depot project, I wasn't really sure what we were doing, why we were doing it, but now when I look years, past it, it's almost completed. We're down to the very end of it, and I do apologize. I don't have current photos. We were trying to do some electronic things between myself and the city of Clare, and I can't get the updated version. So I will have to fill in some blanks, and I will send it on to Kevin so he can send out the final once I can get it on a zip drive and get it back out to you guys. So I do apologize for that. But unfortunately, like every community action, we're also busy, and I was just off for vacation for 2 weeks, so I'm trying to jump back in. So I do apologize for all the slowness on the technology part. So how did we possibly get involved in this? I'll tell you, it was a really simple process, and I'll go through the PowerPoint in just a minute. But we had some property donated to us years ago in the downtown area, and we built this beautiful, beautiful housing project. But we looked across at some really ugly, blight buildings that should have been torn down. And so one day when I was trying to figure out what to do with that ugly, ugly land, I happened to have a meeting with the city manager and began our story, if that is honestly. I said, what can we do with that project? So I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of the history so that you can see what it looked like. Sorry that you're not going to see what it looks like today, but I will send that, I promise, when I can get that on like I said, a zip drive. But if you want to go ahead and open up the slideshow. Again, this goes back to a very, very old depot back in the 1800s. Clare is a very, very rural community. For those of you who don't know Michigan, we're about an hour and a half north of the capital in Lansing. So we're sitting in the very center of the state. This is really pretty much of an old farming community, lumbering type area. So just to show you a little bit of the old Clare. If you could go on with that. You can see that the depot was built a long time ago. It was destroyed by a fire, so it was rebuilt following that. But one of the things you can see on this slide, at least I hope you can, it's black and white, but the very unique depot, it has that really weird-looking round room, which still exists today, which is really a neat place. So if you want to keep going on that. Again, it was rebuilt, and it really was just this really neat thing. But in today's Clare, the spot that it sits on is actually an exchange station, so there's lots of train activity around it, but it was sitting on a plot of land that could not be used. A little of that stuff if you want to move on. Again, this is about what it looked like, or near what we looked like when we started to think about what to do with it. As you can see, the passenger service ended, and the building was starting to look old and unused. And basically the railroad said, either get rid of this building or we're going to tear it down. And so the city of Clare was very, very fortunate to have it donated to them. If you want to keep me on that picture. And that's what it looked like the day we started working with it. As you can see, it probably should have been torn down then. You see all the boarded up walls, the roof was falling in. It looked like something we probably shouldn't even touch. But as you can see, it was in this really weird spot in the railroad. And today's railroad company, which is a private, wanted it out of the way. So we were very, very fortunate that somebody in the community decided to purchase it And as long as it was moved, it was donated to the city of Clare, but it did have to be moved somehow. And I know one thing that you're not seeing is it's an L-shaped building, and we were able to move it without taking it apart. So you're going to see a little bit of this. I'll talk more about how it helped us as a community action. I just wanted you to see the history of it. Move forward on that. Again, if you look at the condition it was in, we had a couple different places to look at it in town, and so we couldn't decide. And we were really led by the State Historic Preservation because it had to be pointed a certain direction. They wanted us to keep it as historical as possible, and we were really struggling with where to put it. And I was looking at it from a whole different viewpoint. I was, as a communication, I really didn't care about the historic part at that point. It wasn't something that was personal interest, but I did have this beautiful, beautiful senior high-rise that looked right at the blight of those buildings. Well, I think you'll see extra in just a moment. But again, we proposed to the state of Michigan a couple different options as to where we could send it. Of course, they didn't like any of them. They didn't want us to move it, but that was not an option that we had to consider. So are you still on the same page? We're looking at the three options that we were looking at? Okay, good. It's kind of weird not following. Kind of weird following a different angle. Okay, so moving onward, they did approve one site with where this old hotel was, but it wasn't able to become ours. Actually, there was a private owner on that, and we failed to pick up that property. If you move forward, that's when we became involved as a community action, because I really wanted to get rid of that piece of property that I was looking at in downtown. So we developed a relationship between the city of Clare, ourselves, the Arts Council, which was an odd one, but they needed a home. The Clare Area Chamber of Commerce also needed a home. The Downtown Development Authority, we wanted to add the convention, Visitors Bureau. And so we started bringing all those partners. And the Department of Transportation, one of the reasons that they became part of it is that in Michigan we have a rails to trails that goes completely across the state. And what they've done is they've taken the old railroad track and made it into a usable pathway. So they've paved it in most areas of the state, except in downtown Clare. So that was one of our selling points, was to make it the trailhead for the community, which brought in more tourism with the bicycles, people walking dogs, people walking, big carriages. But interestingly, on the east side of Clare, that is motorized, but yet where my office is at on the west side of Clare, it's motorized. So we can see snowmobiles and motorcycles, whereas in town they don't. So one of the pieces that's still not done with this project is to link that final, I believe there's 3 miles in between one end to the other, but that's why the Department of Transportation was so important. But again, you can see the Great Lakes, and we formed that steering committee, which we started with 30 members, and I believe when we ended, we had over 60 members that joined us. And from the community action side of things, this was a really unique time for us to build. You're doing fundraising. They also call it friend raising. So these were people that typically didn't know who we were. They're not the low-income sector. They were businesses, local bankers. They were not people we had typically gone to for fundraising. So one of the unique experiences for us was to build those friends out there as we became part of a project that was outside of our typical scope. We are now able to build relationships with businesses, because one of our primary roles with the project was to be the fiduciary. Because they were going to be receiving grants, they're receiving private donations, they had no tracking ability for that process, in which we do. We have a software that we use. And so a big part of ours was to handle the financials to the project and work with some of the vendors, that the contractors and things like that. But again, we stepped into a part of the community that we really did not have a place previously, and we still have that place today, which is really exciting. When we built our housing project just a couple of years before, around that same time, we were just becoming known as a local business versus a local nonprofit. And so this was kind of an extension of that relationship. But again, monthly meetings, as you know, in any of our projects that we work on, and we really started moving on to what was this, how are we going to bring them to the community. So move on a little bit. We did pick that site. If you can see, those were the buildings that I wanted to get rid of. The building, the far left building was, actually we used it for storage. The middle building was falling in, including all the birds were living in there. You couldn't, it was very dangerous. And the red and blue building was actually a car repair that we ended up purchasing. And how that came out to us in the end is that the building on the left, the off-white one, was donated to us along with the building across the street. We donated that to the depot because it didn't cost us. We actually paid for that piece of property, the red, white, and blue, and sold it back to the city, and we made a small amount of interest because it was our money. So we had a 4% interest on that, so we earned just a little bit more for using our funds to get that started. But again, as I've said a couple times now, I just wanted to get rid of those buildings. The city ended up demolishing those, taking them down at their expense, purchasing them in full, so that could become the home of our and becoming the trailhead, as you can see. So we had lots of approvals, everything from the city commission. We had to go after brownfield dollars to ensure that the ground underneath was healthy, and everything that we could think of to make this viable site. Am I going too fast? Why not? Get a history there.
No,
So, okay.
this is fine.
Great. All right, so if you move on, you're now going to see, as we prepared the odd-shaped building, because it really is, we were preparing that for movement, and we were also preparing and getting that old buildings down. Not really exciting pictures, but again, I'm going to talk more about how this all became part of it, to the community action part, but I want you guys to see the history of it. So you can start starting to happen there. If you could go a little bit further. This is where we really started publishing. We did a website. We did a book that we were really fortunate. There was an author that wrote about the history of the area, and he donated his proceeds to the project, as well as the print that was made to the right side. Were also sold throughout the community, and all proceeds were donated to it. And so that was really neat. But this was also where we started to do our major fundraising. Anything from foundation grants to local fundraising to events. We bought things like railroad hats and buttons and everything we could think of selling. It was kind of a hard fundraising project because we happened to have other ones going on in the community, such as the library and the park for the kids, and so our timing could have been worse. But we still made it, and somehow, fortunately, so the final couple grants from some of the energy companies and some more local banks, we were able to finish off our fundraising. But if you go forward from there, this building is now being lifted up, ready to be moved. And you still see it's in horrible shape, but it's beautiful today. Actually, and at this point, we emptied out the inside, meaning there was a lot of historical things to save, such as windows and wainscoting. The wood was absolutely gorgeous in there, but it needed a lot of work. Benches, anything that was salvageable, we did. But anyways, that's from the historic side of it, not anything I know a lot about. So it was what we thought was going to be a few hours of moving, took about, I think it was about an 8 or 10 hour day that it was going down the street, and it was only had to go about, I think it was less quarter mile, but because of the size of it, it had to go in little steps. As you can see the wheels on the bottom, it took quite a long time to maneuver, but we had no electrical lines or any obstacles in its way. It just had to slowly creep down the street to the new site, which was nice. Give you an idea of this picture just kind of shows you how it sits on that. It looks very small in the photo, but it's a lot larger inside. You can see there's a sign also where we started getting our logo out there and getting the community aware of what was coming. So if you look at the next site, you'll see it up on stilts. And this was the really unique thing. We had to put the building in place before we could put the basement. We were adding a second floor for more office space and more room for what we are now, what we are sustainability, our renters. All city services such as the chamber and the visitor center. We wanted to make sure it was sustainable. But as you can see behind it, there is my senior building, and it's a gorgeous thing that was looking at old buildings now, looking at the ugly depot, and it now looks at the beautiful new depot. Where we're at with it today is we do not have the landscaping done yet, but the building itself is being finalized for opening. It's partially opened. We'll have full occupancy shortly, but it's not painted. We did have to replace stuff before it left because it would have fallen apart along the way. But again, we had to set it there because it's such an odd shape. We had to put it there before the basement could be built, oddly, but that's the truth. So if you go on, you can see that the basement was then put in place, the cement walls and everything, so it was going to be set down right on top of that. And you can see off to the right, the downtown area it's within the one block area, downtown area. So it's visibly seen. It's right across the street from the police station, the department, the post office. So it's really in a neat location rather than where it was at in the middle of railroad tracks where you really didn't notice it other than it looked like an old blight building, and now it's in the downtown area, so it's very attractive. We had some trains already stop at it, believe it or not, even though it's not working, but it will be a workstation once we fully open. We have to establish it on the site a certain way because of the state historic, but we were able to do that. We actually had to turn it around so you could see the pretty side, but the pretty side is actually looking at the railroad track. But anyways, if you move, you can now see that as it's facing towards the track, and that will, when that's finished, that'll have a real deck and picnic tables and places for family members or visitors to walk around town. Like I said, it's right on the city block. So if you just want to scroll through the last couple of pictures, you can see that construction is going to be starting there. And again, it's not fully open, but again, it's hot right now. And then if you're on to the next picture, you're seeing one above it. I actually believe we were actually in our senior high-rise taking some pictures from across the street. So the last slide is actually just a look what it looked like in the way of what we are going to be adding some bathrooms outside, a lot of decks. And one of the things that we've also done since then is we've received 2 train cabooses that have been hooked up on track outside of that will also be used for railroad paraphernalia so that we can have museums there, places for visitors as well as the school children to come over and see what's happening. But again, I just wanted you to see the slideshow and so you could see where we're at in the way of the physical structure. So when it came to the key action, it was interesting because the city really had no way of capturing those grants, and they didn't really have as much grant writing experience. So we helped with that. We assisted with, like I said, all of the tracking of in-kind donations because there was a lot of community time spent, whether it was cleaning the grounds or building walls or the movement of the building. We had so many different services donated, anything from the electrical work was primarily donated, the excavation was donated. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of work because the community really stood behind us. We had so many players on the team. Because when we built the committee, we brought in many of those contractors to think about how they might participate, as well as anybody that cared about the history of the community. So it was about a $750,000 project. Of course, we have raised, I think it was just over 600 and some thousand, plus the in-kind is probably, I think it was over 250,000. So those numbers are a little bit older because, sorry that I couldn't get you the updated slideshow. But again, there was a lot of lessons that we learned. I think some of the most exciting benefits was to have our name out there with so many remarkable businesses and supporters from the community support and awareness to the collaboration that we were able to develop from there. We were able, like I said before, to be part of the community that really didn't know what low income was about or what grant writing was about, or the acceptance of in-kind donations versus cash donations. Some of my community members didn't even know what in-kind meant, whereas you and I, we all know that because we live on that with some of our grants, such as Head Start, and things like that. Some of our lessons learned, like I said, I had an ulterior motive. I wanted to get rid of the old buildings and put a new building, although I never expected to put another old building in place of it. I did see the future for it. But we gathered more people for volunteerism. Because there were so many volunteers there, they became aware of our agency and then, in turn, want to be, part of what we do. We did learn that it took longer than we expected, so we've been much more involved than we had hoped. But, again, most of our participation was in the fiduciary side of things. One of my lessons learned, if I had done it differently now, is I probably would have charged a small fee for our time because we didn't realize that it was going to be the excess of all the checks written to, whether it was a local hardware or a local contractor or whoever it was we were purchasing services. We've been a fiduciary for multiple community projects. But we never had one that had so much activity and so much money coming in and money going out at the same time. And so if I had looked at it differently, and I talked to a fundraising consultant, and they recommend that nonprofits that do fiduciary for other activities might want to charge a small fee. And I did look into that, and it's usually between 1% to 5%. I would have charged probably closer to the 4 or 5% in this one because we were doing constant payments for whatever, and making sure the reports were all up to date. My finance staff and my development staff were busier than we anticipated. I don't think most of their time, though, the cost to our agency was not much. And remember, we did sell that property, which I didn't think we'd ever sell it, and we did make a small fee on that. If I, back, if I did, I probably would have a different type of arrangement, so that we would have a time frame. This time frame, I think we're about 7 years right now. Our goal was to have it done in 5. And again, some of that was the fundraising happening at the same time that other activities were happening. When it comes to your financials as a community action, we do have to carry their restricted funds throughout the process, but once those are released and the project is completed, of course, the funds are released and that's off of your audit, but it is something that you do have to carry until that moment. So that's my lessons learned. If I had a choice to do it again, I would. It was interesting at this time because, we did it, as Kevin said earlier, for economic purposes. This did create jobs. It created a lot of contractor jobs for those that were paid. It is creating some jobs for the people that will be working in there. It created a community center for children as well as adults, and especially our low-income families that can be there for free. That was exciting to us because in rural areas we don't often have some of those services. And so for us, it tied into what we believe in for our community. Interestingly, we were working on another project at the same time in a different community in the county, and that was a Veterans Memorial Park. So that was happening at the same time, too. And so we were really excited to help our veterans and then also our community in Clare. So it was just a neat learning lesson all the way around. But again, I would do it again. I probably would have just put more boundaries on some of the stuff we could do. I know for myself it was a lot of meetings, but I think it was worth it because, again, I made, even though I've worked here for 30 years, I still met people that I had never met before. And again, I got a chance to talk about who we were and what we do for the community. And so for us, the economic or community development is really critical because we want to make sure that our low-income families have access to those resources too. So for me, it fit with what we were doing. I had to learn a lot about historical things that I didn't know much about. But at the same time, I had the opportunity to teach my history of community action to those parties that wanted to learn. So it was kind of a win-win on both sides. So I guess I'm going to stop here. I've talked a lot to see if there's any questions that I can help with.
Yes, Kevin, just a reminder to type the questions into the chat or Q&A boxes at the bottom of your screen. In the meantime, Jill, let me ask you something. Like 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, when I started here, I was looking at our members' websites to see what people were doing in the way of housing or economic development, and I came across yours, and I was actually impressed when I saw the crowdfunding effort that was going on around this. In fact, I gave it to our communications person at the time so she could put it out on Twitter so that other CAP agencies could see what you're up to. But this is the instance I've seen with crowdfunding, so I just wanted you to comment on that, because that, I think, was helpful in getting match money from the state of Michigan.
It was. Absolutely. And I had not heard of it before, and as a person that's done fundraising for our agency, I had not heard about it. But, it was a really neat way to do it. We were able to get match funding, and it was at a time when the community awareness part was so important, and we took advantage of social media. Today we hear so much about social media, but we wouldn't have done this without. We had one volunteer, his name was Marty. He did all our social media, whether it was our website or doing the crowdfunding. We had a video that was put together. Actually, I wish I had accessed that for you guys. And it was a lot of us doing this. We were all down at the old depot and cheering and just asking people to give money. And the whole thing, but the whole crowdfunding was to get out the word we were doing and why we were doing it. And match, it came in. It was very new to me. And we did that, but we got picked up on some of the local TV stations. We were very lucky with media. They kept us in the press so that people could see the updates. Like I said, that was a new one to me, and I didn't know a lot about it. Even when you called me the first time, I was like, I don't know a lot about it, but we're participating. But it was something I would have my community action do in the future. Now to do that.
Yeah, I think it's something that people should keep in mind. Like, I've not seen anybody else do it, and we're all looking at different ways to raise money and be less dependent on the same grants that have always come from the past. And that's, I think, a new technique that we're taking a look at. Just as an aside, before I came here, I worked for a local micro-lending organization in the D.C. Baltimore area, and we had partnered with a group called Kiva that is this kind of thing, is crowdfunding for people who want to start up their own business and don't have access to small amounts of capital to banks. And the couple others we couldn't make a loan to for various reasons, we got up on there and they got their funding through that. So I was a little aware of it before coming here, a slightly different aspect of it, but it's a tool that can be very, very useful.
Oh, sure. It's interesting. Just hold up another slide if I could add. Well, I just recently was at another community action agency up in northern Michigan. They're interested in getting housing, so I put a slideshow together for them about for-profit activities. And if it's all right, I'd like to include just a couple because we all live on grants, and as everybody knows, grants have either flattened out, they go away, or new ones come back. But we're all limited. We'd love to see the government give us more money, but I don't. We can count on that. They've been here too many decades to really say that it's going to be this way forever. Of course, it always depends on what legislators we have in office and who believes in it. But for us, our for-profit activities have been a variety. We do the senior housing. We have a couple buildings. I'm actually working on a couple more right now. We actually have a handyman services, and we do those for fee for the public, but we also have grants attached to that through our local United Way to do our handyman services for free for our elderly. We do a certain amount, and we try to get other match money for them if possible. We also we have some buildings over the years. Our agency has purchased buildings, and as we've either not needed them or we found other places to be, such as joined like early childhood center where everybody's in the same place. We ended up vacating some buildings, but instead of selling them, I've rented them out. So we actually earn, it's not a lot of money, but somewhere close to $35,000 a year profitable money to have those rentals, but we only rent to other nonprofits, try to keep rents down for them. We are actually now selling some of our own training and consultation. I'm marketing my own staff who, whether it's their family service credential or they know how to set up, certain policies and procedures. We're trying to sell some of our services to other community actions or other nonprofits that might be available. We do contract for services such as state contracts where we can, kind of keep our costs lower, but we profit because they're paying for unit rates like that. Last year, I think we profited like $50,000 through that. We did a really weird thing recently. We cleared out every closet, every drawer, every building we had and sold them in a garage sale and made close to $2,000 in a garage sale. So I'm always looking for other ways to help support the agency because I do worry about grant sources. So as a community action, I know my auditor sometimes looks at me and says that I run my nonprofit like a business, but for me, I look at that as sustainability. I'm always looking for other money to allow us to either do programs that we can't normally do because we don't have the funds, and so it gives us some discretionary money. We increase our fund balance. We have a very, very healthy fund balance because of that. I look at our housing projects alone. Those are assets between one building's a $3.5 million asset. So, it's not something I'm going to sell, but it's something that the agency would have if they ever need it, in the future. Plus, I have another one, and I'm hoping to build two more in the near future. But it really, like I said, even with the Depot project, we enhanced our community partnerships. I'll use the skills that my staff have, and especially the housing projects. To me, that's just provide safe and, housing, safe and affordable housing for especially our vulnerable seniors. But I really do look at other options, and I get myself into those things like the Depot project or the Veterans Memorial Park, things like that, because I do look at other ways to sustain the agency.
You made a very good case for why to go into community economic development to begin with, and it does all those things that you just mentioned, and that's why I'm hoping other people will pick up on that idea. I like the fact too, you're seeing your housing project right across the street from where the Depot, and it ends up being a nice asset for the residents of the senior center. They can walk across the street.
And in time they'll be able to hopefully get on one of those tour trains where they go up maybe an hour to go look at the color and have dinner for the autumn and then come back home and it's right there that we have community concerts right in the adjoining park. And like I said, as soon as we get our final grant from the Department of Transportation, we'll be able to connect that path so they'll have a path to walk out various parts of the downtown area rather than a gravel path that's there now or walking in the street. We'll have some beautiful sidewalks for them. But, it's just been a very, very unique opportunity, and I think it's important for community action as well as a nonprofit part of us that we get a chance to be introduced in the community level, because oftentimes, if I come across them and they'll say, well, if you've been here for, over 50 years, how come I've never heard of you? Well, my answer is pretty standard. You've probably never needed our help. But I bet you know a family member or a neighbor that has needed us. So it's always been nice to be introduced to those other folks with hopes that they'll continue to support us down the way and, be able to be a part of the community. We belong to our chambers everywhere, but this kind of gave us a nice foot in the door where they can call us now and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? Is this something you guys could help with? Or, do you want to sponsor something for your, for your preschool program or whatever it might be? We get calls now because we took on a different role than we had previously.
Yeah, I have heard that from other cats also gone into community economic development. Yeah, people see you differently, and you start getting calls you wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In fact, not so long ago, I had a building given to me because of that. They had heard we were willing to work with, rentals, and so they donated a building. It was valued about $80,000, and I now rent it out to another nonprofit. We cleaned it up, fixed it up, and it's another asset that we can put on our list. But again, it's not something we're using for ourselves. But again, I'm trying to look at the future of the organization, because when I someday retire, I don't know when and if that will be, but I want to make sure that things are still here when I'm gone, because we've worked a long time to be where we are today, and the size that we are today. And so, but it's fun. I mean, I actually have enjoyed being a part, and I took a little bit stronger role than maybe I would have other places, but it's close to my administrative office, so it's been entertaining to be a part of something that's so important to the community. And the publicity, free publicity we received throughout the process was amazing. Yeah, just because as a partner, we were included with everything. I didn't have to put a lot of marketing into, letting people know what we were doing.
Thank you, Jill. I don't see any other questions from the folks on. I just want to thank you for taking your time, especially since you just got back in town. I know I was trying to bug you when you were on vacation, and you're
not a problem
to do that when you got back. So it's much appreciated, and I'm sure everybody on the call got a lot out of it. We will send it out to the people who are not able to be on here today. I just want to mention a couple of other upcoming things before we close off. Here on the 28th of November, we're going to have a webinar that will be looking at a member in Salt Lake City who set a kitchen to provide meals for their Head Start kids and ended up using it as a social enterprise, which had not been the original intention. And so we'll be talking about how they got into that. And we don't have a date yet, but we're also looking at a call that will highlight Fresno EOC and their work using solar power panels, installing those, and how you can use energy as a social enterprise as well. And that's one example. So we'll be getting the word out about those as we get to the time. So I hope some of you will also join us for those calls. And then, so thank you to Jill and all the great work that been doing up there in Mid-Michigan Community Action. So
thanks so much.
Take care for everybody. Take care. We'll talk to you again later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.